I was raising the question of, you know, the roles of people stepping into the revolution, new people stepping into the revolution, along with people who are coming into the kind of like the end of what we call the Ohio process. You know, more experienced people, you know, more people who have a rich understanding, but still for both of these roles of people, whether they're new or been around for some years, there's a thing of, you know, them understanding more and taking on more responsibility. And so my question was, how do we actually, you know, hasten toward the development of the necessary conditions for a revolutionary situation? How do we really step on the social accelerator and really make revolution?
Okay, well, if you remember, I'll try to be as concise about this as I can. If you remember, during the course of the second part of my talk, I said it would be helpful to talk about what is the similarities and what are the differences with the situation, say, in a third world country where they've been able to wage a revolutionary war from the beginning of the process. Well, look, if you were in that kind of situation where you were waging a war, you would be clearer to you. There'd be lots of difficulties, lots of sacrifices, obviously, but it'd be clearer to you, okay, where are we in relation to where we need to go? You know, we need to eventually defeat their whole thing, you know, and we have to get to the point where we're able to do that. Here's where we are now. So, okay, how do we, you know, the question would be, you know, maybe clearer. How do we get from here to there? And you would start grappling and wrestling with, okay, what are the next steps, the next fights we have to wage in order to get closer to where we, you know, tip things over and we are, you have the upper hand and we're going to finish them off, just to put it, you know, in clear terms, right? Well, without, you know, falling into, you know, thinking that you can do exactly the same thing here, that you can wage a war here from the beginning, but applying the same kind of thinking to a different strategic approach, at every point we should be looking at, okay, where are we in relation to where we need to get to? Everything we're doing, like I stressed many times, is aimed at getting to where we can go for the whole thing, where we can actually have a real chance to take them on and defeat them. Not in an easy, you know, it's not that it's going to be easy and fall into our lap, but where there's a real chance that you could have okay, where are we now? What are we confronting, right? How do we go about taking the next steps that get us closer to that? That's what it means to hasten. It means looking at the terrain out there. How do we affect this terrain? How do we wield the organized forces we have in the most effective way as an organized force? And through that process grow, not just by ones or twos, but by, you know, leaps and bounds, incorporating more people into the organized ranks. That was my point about accumulate and impact, that, you know, you wield your forces. If you have X number of people and they all kind of act in a dispersed way, it has a certain effect, but not that great an effect. If you have a certain number of people and they act as an organized force, you know, particularly in relation to what they can identify as sort of key ways in which things are sharply posing themselves. You know, one big example of that is the whole Trump-Pence regime thing. But there are other examples too. I mean, on small scale, a police murder happens. How do you wield your forces in an organized way that actually attracts people to you? And then how do you work with them to be able to have more organized forces so that you can have a bigger effect, not just in one neighborhood or community or even one city, but in a way that impacts the larger society and ultimately even the world. That's why I'm saying, like, you know, this point I brought up about the BBC doing a special on the youth killing each other in Chicago. Imagine if we turn that around. Imagine if in this situation a revolutionary force is emerging which becomes a pole of attraction, a magnetic force that's drawing youth to that. Well, then the way in which, you know, the powers that be have tried to use Chicago in a negative way, and the youth in Chicago in particular in a negative way to say, see how we have to be a lot more repressive, then that'll start turning around into a positive thing. You know, and right now you have a lot of people, you know, I talked about how in my youth, which once did exist, I talked about how in my youth I got attracted to, things like the Black Panther Party and stuff because I could see two things. They were very serious, and what they were doing was righteous. That's what I understood at the beginning. I hated the oppression of black people from a lot of experience I'd had up to that point. And I thought these people are serious, and they're very bold, and they're very righteous. And I wasn't unique in that. That had that effect on a lot of middle-class youth at that time. I mean, now you've got this scene where you got all this, gangster rap and everything, and you got fraternity boys riding around playing it. But that's just another, if you want to be blunt, that's just another expression of racism. Maybe not for all of them, but for a lot of them, it's just like, this is like what they used to call, vocal group music, doo-wop music way back in the day. This is like, or, rhythm and blues music back in the day. This is jungle music. It's just, they're not inspired, by the idea that people are setting out to change the world. They're just kind of like posing. That's very different than than what we went through when I was a youth. We were inspired. And you got to, because people were serious, they were bold, and what they were doing was right, and nobody could deny it except an asshole. People could see that it was righteous. And so if you start having that emerge among people, who are catching the worst hell into the system, the same thing is going to happen. It's going to attract the attention in a good way rather than a bad way of a lot of people in society. Yes, the people who want to put it down and snuff it out, but also a lot of other people who go along with the way things are and even talk about how this is the best of all, blah, blah, blah bullshit, but who really know that there's something wrong here, but have just sort of had an overlay of cynicism over that, because they don't think you can do anything about it. And all of a sudden you see people who are serious, coming from a serious place, who are breaking through all kinds of shit they have to break through to be out there with fighting for something that's real. And that's going to change things too, not automatically, but it's going to change things. It's going to send an electric shock in a positive way throughout the society. And that is going to, create more favorable conditions for things to grow and make leaps, and for more people to advance more quickly. When things are happening slowly, it takes people a long time to go through changes. When things are happening in a very concentrated way, in a very, quickly, things are changing day after day, week after week, and years get concentrated in a month, people also change in a much more accelerated way. So there's no magic thing about it, but there is a way in which by having our sense of where we're at in the process and where we need to get to, and what are some of the key things that are sharpening up, that if we go after them, we're going to send that electric shock through society. We're going to galvanize a lot of attention on what we're doing. And then we have to work with people in a good way to enable them to be part of this, and to develop. I once said to somebody that we have a great advantage and a great disadvantage in having a very developed revolutionary leadership. It's more an advantage than a disadvantage. The big advantage should be obvious. When you have a lot of, developed leadership, it's, a lot of work has been done that people can take up and wield. They don't have to start from scratch and do all that, fight all the way through to do all that work themselves. That's a big advantage. The disadvantage, even though it's not the main thing, it's real, is, for example, when the generation I was part of, when we came forward, we had to fight through to figure out a lot of these things ourselves. We were 21, 22, 18, 19, trying to, conquer the whole world. There were other people we were inspired by and learned from, but we had to figure out a lot of this stuff ourselves. Well, that's we have to find a way to get the right combination or the right synthesis where people have a lot of this rich stuff that's been done that they can take up. But also the process is created and the means are created where they can figure some of this stuff out themselves in terms of how to actually make it go. Not start from zero, but be part of the process of actually figuring this out. Because that's an invaluable, it's an invaluable experience. There's nothing like that of actually grappling with how are we going to make this happen together with other people and actually learning as you do. And the more that you do that, the more you want to be part of doing it. So we have to find, it's very difficult, but we have to find the right synthesis between not hiding or keeping from people what we do know, but also being honest about what we don't know. And what we need them for. We need a lot of people to help us solve these problems. That's why I threw open the question I did. We don't know the answer to everything. Far from it. We know some very fundamental things, and we're working on them all the time. But there's a lot we don't know. Right down on the, especially down on the level of how things happen with people and how they actually see them and feel about them. And we need those people to be part of this process. It's not just we need them as foot soldiers. We need them to help us figure out, to be part of the process of solving these problems of this revolution. We really need them to be part of that. And they can do it. They can be part of it. This is not something that only a few people can do. Yes, if you've been at it for longer, you've learned a lot of things, but also some things you learn aren't so good. So, you got to keep on learning anew, and we need those people, right? The people, the basic people, all kinds of people to be using their minds, not just like I said, to be using their bodies to be foot soldiers, to be using their minds to come together and figure out how do we break through and make this real? How do we make that next leap and the leap after that? And how do we bring forward not just 2 or 3 people, but 20 or 50 and then 100 and 500 people to be part of this? When the Black Panther Party got going, at first, when I started hanging around with them, there was about 8 people in the Black Panther Party. They were very serious and very dedicated. And then a few things happened that, they had the thing in the Sacramento, the state government of California in Sacramento, where they took their guns and marched into the state capitol, which got a certain amount of attention. And then, then there was a whole thing where Huey Newton got into, was accused of killing a cop and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm not saying people should go out and get accused of killing a cop, just to be clear. I'm just saying, all of a sudden, there was a lot of attention focused on them. And I remember they're telling me, all of a sudden, people were coming to them and saying, we want to set up a chapter in this city. We want to set up a chapter in that city. We want to, and hundreds of people were coming all of a sudden. And they had a real problem. How do they give leadership to these people? That's a real problem, but that's a problem we should love to have, okay? So, this is the kind of dynamic you have to get going, and you need people. It's not, like I said, we just need them to do work. Yes, we all need to do work for the revolution, but we need people to help us figure out the problems of the revolution, to solve these problems, to make these leaps, to get where we need to go. And that doesn't mean that every idea that people are going to bring to us is going to be good or correct. Some of them are going to be crazy. Some of them are going to be way off base. Some of them are going to be bad. Some of them are going to be wrong. But some of them are going to have real insights and really valuable, wisdom for us to take up and act on. And that's what we need, that whole process where that's what's happening. So maybe that is, since we're running out of time, a good place to end. But I just want to say, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. But I also want to say, this really is serious, what we're talking about. It's serious, but there's also a joyful aspect to it because, like I said, you're thinking about the way the world could be and what we could bring into being, even with all the sacrifice. And, nobody should be involved who isn't convinced that this is right and this is what needs to happen and this is what they should, be dedicating themselves to. But everybody who does And if you're not convinced of that, talk to us and struggle with us. Let's fight that through. But the more that you come to see that this is what has to happen, the more I want to call on people to get actively involved. And with the twists and turns, not to get discouraged. If we have problems, let's solve them together. And bring forward more people, in, one wave after another, to help us solve these problems. Because these are the problems that need to be solved in order for this system to be brought down and a really better world brought into being. So that's kind of what I would like to leave people with, along with thanking you all for coming.